yourself a friend. Lay down your defenses and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm excited to welcome you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. So I'm a civil human servant, and what that means is that I focus my ministry and my work on building human peace and common ground. And so it's in that effort that I'm looking at my own spiritual heritage to try to find those things that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans, regardless of our different faiths and our different politics and our different lifestyle. So I'm really excited to be talking about the very end of Jesus's story. And today we're actually going to look at Judas. And he's the individual who ended up actually betraying Jesus and handing him over to the religious leaders. And today we're going to see what it's like for him after he realizes that Jesus is going to be condemned and what he does to try to show his remorse and his regret. And it is unfortunately a sad turn of events for him. But that's what I really want to hone in on as far as the message today for us as human beings now is what it looks like to betray innocence and the cost of it. So let's go ahead and jump into the passage. It's Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 through 10. Starting with verse 1. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? You see to it. Then he threw down the pieces of silver to the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury because they are the price of blood. And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what was spoken of Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. So today is, in some ways, a bit of a difficult conversation, because today I want to talk about what it looks like to betray innocence in our society and how we do that now. We may not have the same exact situations as they did. We may not have the same religious structure or governance structure, but we have the same kind of principles in action today. What does it look like for us to betray innocence in our society today? And what's the cost of that going to look like? So let's go ahead and walk through the passage. I want to explain a little bit about what's going on. There's some cultural elements that'll really help us understand what's being said and what's happening right now. There's a couple confusing things and some things that will make a lot more sense after we talk about it. So to start, we get to the very beginning. Jesus has been handed over. He's been put on trial. This happened in the last couple of studies. You remember Peter denies Jesus in the courts of the palace where Jesus is being tried, because the servant saw Peter and remembered him being a part of Jesus's crowd. And so he denies it 3 times and then ends up going away weeping bitterly. And today in this study, we're given the story of Judas. And this is sort of the closing out of his overarching story, the individual who ended up betraying Jesus and handing him over to the political leaders of his day. And at the very beginning of this story, we have the political leaders putting their heads together and trying to figure out how to get Jesus executed. For those of us who come from a Christian background or from a church background, much of this story can become pretty old hat. We listen to it every year. There are dramas and pageants and music and artwork and all kinds of things that happen every year. We have these dramas where we try to make everybody cry as much as possible to get an idea and to capture what happened 2,000 years ago. But sometimes I think that we miss the nuances of what are being said here. And we miss some of the things as just being part of the side story, but they're not. And Matthew actually puts them in this account of Jesus for a reason. And there are some teachings there that I think are super important. And so we get to this picture of Judas. Now, you may remember Judas was this individual who was in charge of the finances. He's accused by Matthew of stealing from the crowd or from the group. We don't really know if there's evidence of that, but Matthew anyway tells us is kind of the character of who he is. We also have this sort of perspective of Judas as being this individual who was disappointed with Jesus. He started with Jesus because he was excited to see an individual who had a huge amount of mass appeal. A lot of people were really excited about Jesus because many people were stepping up to follow him. And so Judas probably saw this as an opportunity to get on board with an individual who was going to change the nation. And in his mind, he saw Jesus as this political figure, somebody who was going to run for office, if you will. They don't have quite that structure, but generally speaking, he's going to be a political individual. He saw Jesus as somebody who was going to overthrow the system. Judas very much felt that the system was wrong, but he wasn't sure exactly what was wrong about it, clearly. And he saw this as an opportunity to overthrow Rome, who was currently controlling the Jewish nation. And so here we have Judas, who is upset, no doubt disappointed in this Jesus person that he thought was going to be a powerful figure, yet in his mind ends up being a bit of a weakling. Because Judas is like, why are you giving yourself up to these individuals? These people are bad people. Why are you giving your life to them? Why not fight them? But he doesn't understand what Jesus understands, and that is to make true, remarkable, lasting social change. It cannot happen through violence. It must happen through peace and through passive resistance that Jesus shows, and sacrifice and demonstration of love. And so Judas hands over Jesus to these the religious leaders who were the political leaders of the day. And now those religious leaders are trying to figure out how to kill Jesus. They've condemned him to death, and they're going to hand him over to Pontius Pilate. Now, who the heck is Pilate? Rome knows that they've got to keep a tight control over all these nations that are under their empire. One way they do that is they appoint a procurator or a governor type individual who's Roman and who oversees essentially the political aspects of the Jewish nation and population. And the only way that they can commit death sentence is to go through the Roman legal system. And so Jesus is going to be brought before the Roman system, and they're going to try to condemn him to death. And we're going to walk through that in just a couple of days. But right now, Judas is remorseful. He did not expect for Jesus to be condemned to death. It's a bit of a surprise to me that he wasn't shocked, that he was shocked by that. Why on earth would you not think that? I mean, they were always after Jesus. They were trying to kill him his whole time and in his whole work and ministry. But I think Judas represents, especially in our modern culture, a type of human perspective that is very common. It's one that places trust in power and money, who sees individuals who exercise power and money and wealth and luxury as individuals who reflect what it is to be great in society. Jesus and his disciples had a totally different picture. And that's what I want to wrap up later in just a couple of minutes to talk about, and something I feel is so applicable today. So Judas realizes what he's done. He's handed over Jesus, who he knows is innocent and hasn't broken any laws and has only done a lot to help individuals who are suffering. And he goes to the temple. He's upset and he throws the money that they gave him, 30 silver coins, into the temple where they're at and says that I've sinned. In other words, I've done something bad. I've committed and condemned an individual to death. And I want no part of it. They could care less, of course. They knew that, but Judas just came to the realization of that. So he throws the money in there, which is about $4,000 worth of what would be our amount of money today. And then he goes away, and it says he hanged himself. So oftentimes when we hear the word hanged himself, we picture a noose and a platform or a tree branch and an individual hanging from the neck. Oftentimes in this ancient culture, really what it meant to hang themselves was to fall on a sword. So falling forward on a sword or a stake or some other means that using gravity essentially to impale yourself. Because in another account, it actually talks about Judas's innards. It was kind of disgusting, but his innards pouring out on the ground. And that really would only happen if he did, in fact, kill himself in that manner. So it's just a side thing, an interesting insight into historic culture. But I did want to point that out since we often have a different perspective of what that word means. And then they end up buying this field. They didn't know what to do with the money. They couldn't use it because it was used to kill innocent blood. They realized that Jesus was innocent. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had a problem using the money. They themselves knew that they were killing an innocent man. So what does this all mean to us? Is there a lesson? Is there a teaching? Is there something that we can take as human beings from this passage and apply to us today? I think there's an important message. And I want to address the church in our society. I came from a very conservative background, Pentecostal, evangelical, holiness tradition, where the emphasis was on being perfect and being as close to perfect as possible, whatever that standard was, so that you could be closer to God and be in more favor with Him. Being in more favor with Him meant more money, meant more happiness. And that was the general way that we thought of things. Unfortunately, today, individuals in the church and leadership have chosen to go the route of Judas. They look at, just like Judas did, the individuals who are wealthy, who live in luxury, who are exercising power, and who have the ability to do terrible things to other people, who ridicule and separate the poor as the people who are the problem instead of people who need to have relief. And they do just like Judas did. They hand over their congregations to the political powers in order to let them run with the church, because they believe that this type of leadership and power has the ability to make social change happen. And here's the frustration. Jesus himself, as we've learned, and as a truly human virtue and wisdom, we know that when we look at leaders, we look at the fruit. In order to discern whether they're good people or not, whether we should put them in charge of things or whether we should not, we look at their fruits. Are their fruits mercy, compassion, humility, justice, peace? Or are they arrogance? Are they slander? Are they degradation? Are they conflict and unrest? Judas looked to the wrong things when he looked to leadership, and we look to instill his confidence and his power into other people. I might encourage us today to stop and when we think about what kind of leadership we want to see in our religious communities, in our society, in our politics, to look for those individuals who are all concerned with helping the suffering, with having mercy, with having compassion, with being humble and lifting other people up. These are the individuals who will bring us into a place of peace and of contentment as a society. Because those who are arrogant, those who are vindictive, those who create conflict lead us to war and to violence. It's a simple human reality. Jesus happened to teach about it, but it applies across the board. And I might just ask you today, this Thursday, that you maybe spend a little bit of time today, like I'm going to be doing, to think about those people that we may have placed our trust in, that we may have given ourselves over to, and ask ourselves the question, what the fruit of their service or their work or their ministry has been. Has it been to create and ease the suffering of those who are suffering in society? Or has it been to create power and wealth? I want to thank you so much for being a part of this Bible study. I would love it. If you have thoughts or reflections or comments, please leave those beneath the video below. I love to hear from you, and I love to hear your insights, because you're the only one in this universe who has the ability to see things the way you do. And I would love it if you would like my Facebook page. If you're on YouTube, there's a little button down here that says subscribe. You can click on that and we can stay in contact with one another so that we can stay upfront about what's going to be happening down the road, because there's some exciting things coming down that I'm really happy about moving into. Some ways that I'm really excited about moving into human common ground and peace more substantially. And I thank you for the opportunity that you've provided for me to do that. So until tomorrow, live at noon, when we meet again, I want you to know that I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It is the only love in this life that we have any control over. And now I would invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.